Another day, another story. The tensions between China and the USA stem from a complex mix of geopolitical, economic, and ideological differences, rather than one-sided bullying. However, China's assertive actions, particularly in areas like trade, military expansion, and technology, often get perceived as confrontational by the US and its allies. Here are some key reasons for this tension. Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel. 1. Strategic rivalry. China is positioning itself as a global superpower, challenging the US's long-standing dominance. This rivalry touches on 1. Military expansion, especially in the South China Sea, where China's activities are seen as aggressive by the US and neighboring countries. 2. Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which has extended China's economic influence worldwide, often to regions where the US had more control in the past. 2. Trade and economic competition. The US and China are locked in a trade war, driven by accusations of 1. Unfair trade practices by China, including intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and state subsidies for Chinese companies. 2. The US imposing tariffs and restrictions on Chinese goods, and China responding with retaliatory measures. 3. China's growing dominance in technology sectors like 5G and AI, which the US views as a threat to its own tech supremacy. 3. Taiwan and regional security. The US maintains unofficial ties with Taiwan, which China considers a part of its territory. China's increasing military pressure on Taiwan and its warnings against US involvement have escalated tensions. Any US support for Taiwan's autonomy or military defense is seen as interference by Beijing. 4. Ideological and political differences. 1. China's authoritarian model of governance, especially under President Xi Jinping, contrasts sharply with the democratic ideals promoted by the US. 2. Human rights issues in places like Hong Kong and Xinjiang have led to US criticism and sanctions, which China views as attempts to undermine its sovereignty. 5. Global influence and alliances. 1. China has been working to reshape global governance institutions to better align with its interests, often in opposition to US-led initiatives. 2. The formation of new global alliances, such as the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Coalition, and China's engagement in organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, is seen as a move to counterbalance US influence. 6. The South China Sea and China's bullying tactics. The South China Sea is one of the most contentious flashpoints between the US and China. China has claimed almost the entire sea as its own through the Nine-Dash Line, even though an international tribunal ruled in 2016 that China's claims have no legal basis. Yet, China has continued to build artificial islands and militarize them, placing airstrips, missile systems, and naval bases there. The US regularly conducts freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, sending warships through the South China Sea to challenge what it sees as China's illegal territorial claims. To China, these US actions are provocative, while to the US and its allies in the region, China's actions are seen as bullying its smaller neighbors like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia by using military might and economic pressure to assert dominance. When China harasses Filipino or Vietnamese fishermen or confronts US Navy ships, the world sees it as an aggressive China flexing its muscles. From China's point of view, it's safeguarding territory that it sees as historically its own. 7. The technology war, 5G and TikTok. Another key arena of conflict between China and the US has been the technology sector, where China has risen rapidly to challenge US dominance. The most prominent example of this is the 5G battle involving China's tech giant, Huawei. The US has accused Huawei of being an extension of the Chinese government, alleging that its technology could be used for espionage. As a result, the US banned Huawei from operating in the country and pressured its allies to do the same. Beyond Huawei, Chinese apps like TikTok have come under scrutiny. The US has raised concerns that TikTok, owned by China's ByteDance, collects data on American citizens and could share that information with the Chinese government. These fears have prompted discussions of banning TikTok in the US or forcing it to sell its US operations to American companies. 8. Taiwan, the most dangerous flashpoint. The issue of Taiwan represents perhaps the most sensitive and potentially explosive aspect of US-China relations. Taiwan is a self-governing democratic island that China views as a breakaway province that must eventually be reunified with the mainland, by force if necessary. The US does not formally recognize Taiwan as a separate country, but it has long supported Taiwan with arms sales and diplomatic visits, adhering to the Taiwan Relations Act, which commits the US to helping Taiwan defend itself. In recent years, China has dramatically increased military activities near Taiwan, including flying fighter jets into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, and conducting large-scale military exercises around the island. Meanwhile, US politicians, like then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, have visited Taiwan, infuriating Beijing. China views US involvement in Taiwan as a violation of its sovereignty and a direct threat to its goal of reunification. 9. Economic warfare, trade and tariffs. The economic battle between the US and China has also been fierce. In 2018, the US under President Donald Trump launched a trade war against China, imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, accusing China of unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. China retaliated with tariffs on American products, particularly targeting US farmers and manufacturers. The trade war highlighted deep economic interdependencies between the two nations, but also exposed the vulnerabilities of global supply chains. Both countries saw economic slowdowns, and companies on both sides scrambled to adjust. Though the trade war has somewhat cooled, tensions remain high as the US continues to restrict access to advanced technologies and place sanctions on Chinese companies. 10. Human rights issues. Hong Kong and Xinjiang. China's internal policies, particularly regarding human rights, have also become major points of contention with the US. China's handling of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong and its treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minority in Xinjiang have drawn international criticism. The US has accused China of committing genocide in Xinjiang, where reports of mass detention camps, forced labor, and surveillance of Uyghurs have sparked global outrage. Sanctions have been placed on Chinese officials and companies associated with these abuses. In Hong Kong, China's imposition of the national security law effectively ended the region's autonomy and silenced the pro-democracy movement, despite international condemnation. The US responded by ending Hong Kong's special trade status and sanctioning Chinese officials responsible for the crackdown. Conclusion: while China's actions might be seen as bullying by some, the situation is far more nuanced. China is trying to assert itself on the global stage after decades of rapid economic growth, and this is often perceived as aggressive or confrontational, especially when it clashes with US interests. On the other hand, the US, trying to maintain its global leadership, sees China's rise as a challenge to the rules-based international order it helped create. As both nations jostle for power, the world watches closely, aware that their rivalry will shape global politics for years to come. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.